Hello again and welcome to another session, the A4Q Testing Summit Edition 2024. I am delighted to welcome Jonathan Hunsley to the stage. Jonathan is based in the UK with a company called Assist KD, Knowledge Development. Jonathan, I'm not going to say too much more. Your title is intriguing me. Winging it doesn't work. We need professional service design. So I'm going to ask you to tell us all about it.
Brilliant. Thank you for that welcome, and absolutely delighted to be here with you all today. So I'm here to talk about service design and why we need professionalism in the field of service design. So without further ado, then I will get started. So quick introduction. This is me on a skiing holiday. I was on skiing holiday earlier this year and managed to complete a black slope for the very first time. So I'm not just a service designer, I'm a amateur, very amateur skier. It's only taken me 20 or so years to get to the point where I could do a black slope. But my 12-year-old son, Bertie, was very impressed, I say anyway, with me getting to do the black slope with him. I've been involved in the development of the A4Q Certified Service Designer qualification that some of you would have heard of. I'm the co-chief architect with that qualification. And some of you may have seen me on the BA Brew podcast. If you haven't, please do look it up and check it out. So let's have a look at the value proposition for today's presentation. So don't worry, I'm not going to talk about skiing too much. What we want to cover, or what I want to cover today with you, is an exploration of these types of questions. What is service design? What is the value of this professional discipline? What are the skills of a service designer? How is it performed? And also I'm going to touch on some of the different thinking approaches, techniques, skills, and services that are either used by or are offered by service design professionals. So I am going to start with a bit of a tale of woe. So why is service design important? Well, it impacts and influences every single customer experience we have. And we all have good and bad customer experiences with different organizations, be they commercial organizations or public sector organizations. But I'm going to share a tale of woe relative to the replacement of a car windscreen. So I'm driving home from holiday and there's a broken windscreen. A stone hits my windscreen as I'm driving home from the airport. I notice the crack and submit a claim to my insurance company, basically hoping that this doesn't take up too much time. They arrange the first appointment to come and replace the windscreen at my house. I receive a text message to remind me of this appointment on the day before. And then on the morning, about 15 minutes before they're due to arrive, the company ring me up and say they've forgotten to book the glass. They've got no glass to actually replace my windscreen with. And I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't got a robust process for ordering windscreens when that's their job, to replace car windscreens. But anyway, I then have a second appointment. The fitters come out, they change the windscreen, and there's a bit of a problem with the bolt and my rear view mirror. They do some tweaks to it, and I think it's all fine. Relatively happy with the customer experience at this point. So you can see that the touch point's gone green at this second appointment. Anyway, I'm driving the car a few days later, and the car rear view mirror falls off the windscreen, and I attempt to refit it. I attempted to refit it quite a few times, speak to my friend who's a mechanic. I'm a little bit annoyed. This company's come out and done a piece of work on my car, and they've basically made the car worse than it was before they came out. So I'm a little bit annoyed, and you can see that my customer journey's gone red there in terms of the touch point. So I call them up. They then come out for a third time. This is a third appointment. And the fitters arrive and they claim that they can't do the work on the car. It's not possible on this third appointment to replace the windscreen. And I point out to them they've already replaced the windscreen on my driveway and that they're not actually telling me the truth. I'm quite angry at this point. The fitters walk away from the job. They fit a new windscreen again. So this is the second windscreen that they fitted. and they tell me at the end of the job that they can't fix the rear view mirror. So I've still got a broken rear view mirror in my car. I'm not very happy at this point. I end up complaining to both the car windscreen replacement company and my insurance company. I've just renewed my car insurance, and I can assure you I haven't gone to the same provider that were supporting me in this customer journey. You can see that I'm very red and angry. They'd used a subcontractor, a company that specializes in replacing car windscreens, and they're not able to get it right. They can't order glass when it's needed. They can't train their fitters. The customer service was non-existent, not very good. And I really do have to put quite a lot of effort in to get a very simple job done. And I think that this is an example of the level of service that some organizations are offering some customers some of the time. And I think this is a big problem relative to service delivery. And this is one of the issues that I think service designers can help with, is trying to make sure that customers aren't disgruntled, they're not angry, that processes, services work as intended in alignment with the offer that an organization makes in terms of its promises. So there's a big opportunity, I think, across the globe in terms of improving services. There's a huge expense of acquiring new customers. The marketing costs are 4 or 5 times the cost of keeping in an existing customer. And there's a huge amount of time, effort, and money being spent fixing errors relative to products and services with customers. And it's all coming out of the back pocket of those organizations that are offering dreadful services. And customers like myself are walking away from them as well if they offer and deliver poor quality services. So this is where service designers come in. And I want to unpack this question first of all. What is a professional? And then we're going to look at that relative to service design. So a professional is someone that has a high level of education and training. They have met a standard in terms of competency, and they're able to perform to that level of competency. So it's not a layperson. It's not someone that can just wing it. You can't just pretend that you're a service designer and go and play at this thing. You've really got to study service design and understand the underpinning theories, tools, techniques, and the principles that are used in the service design profession. A professional should have ethics, should have ethical behavior. When they say they're going to do a job, they should be accountable and responsible for doing that job. They should be able to collaborate. They're subject to continuous improvement. They're reliable, they're consistent, and above all, they have competence. So they're able to do the things that they promise that they will do. So what is service design then? Well, let's try and unpack that. So this is a definition from the book Design for Digital that was written a few years ago by Jeannie Ross and her colleagues at MIT. It's about configuring our business systems in a way that works for both the organization and for its customers. So we're configuring people and processes to make sure that we can meet the promises that are made by the organization and deliver the offerings within the context. And one of the models that I use is the POP-IT model to help me think about what is the business system and what are the elements of the business system. So who are the people? What's their level of skill and motivation? Where do they sit in the organization? What partners are we using? What policies do they adhere to? What's the organizational culture? What are the processes that we use to deliver our products and services? And are they aligned with the other elements of the business system? What information do we capture? What data? And then the supporting technologies. And the service designer is looking at this relative to any individual product or service and trying to configure this in a way that works for both the organization and its customers. They use these underpinning thinking approaches. So there are 4 thinking approaches that you can see on your screen now. The first that I'll talk about is systems thinking, so systemic thinking. So this is all about understanding the whole system, understanding different perspectives on that system, the emergent properties that arise from the system. Service thinking is known as the study of value co-creation, and it's all about recognizing that a company, an organization, can only ever offer value. They cannot, under any circumstances, deliver value. It's ultimately the customer that determines whether or not there is or isn't value in a product or a service offer. They use design thinking, so thinking holistically, thinking divergently, creatively, exploring ideas and converging, sometimes using prototypes, often using prototypes to test our assumptions and to build products and services that work relative to problems and opportunities in an organization. And then one of my favorite thinking approaches is lean thinking, so relentless focus on the customer, flow, reduction of waste, and very high quality services, products, components within the business system. So we're using these 4 thinking approaches in the context of an organization and making decisions relative to the design of products and services in alignment with the strategic goals and priorities, the budgets within an organization. So we have to apply business acumen. And the other thing that we're doing is we're thinking about the holistic customer experience across the end-to-end customer journey. So we're applying these 4 thinking approaches in the context of our organization relative to its customers, to its stakeholders. What's the value of this then? What's the value offer, the value proposition of service design? Well, what does it do on the tin? Basically, it's there to make sure that the services meet the expectations of customers and are aligned to the needs of the organization. That's what I was showing you in that previous model, the business acumen and the customer element. We're doing this in a context. And it's important for service design that we do meet the value proposition and that our customers internally within organizations and externally understand what it is that we are offering. Now, there is some challenges with understanding, well, what is this field of service design? And some of you may have come across a related piece of work that was produced in the business analysis profession. This is the output of Deborah Paul's doctoral research into the definition of the services of a business analysis professional. So what Deborah was doing here was trying to define, using a service thinking, service science perspective, what are the services that are offered by a BA, a business analyst. And you can see there are a variety of different services here within this business analysis service framework. This is used as a starting point to start to define the service offer of business analysts, and it provides clarity in terms of the role and the outcomes of the individual services offered by BAs. Now, what we've done is we've taken this as a service framework and we've adapted this to the service design profession. And within the service design profession, the professionals are also doing situation investigation and problem analysis. That's one of the core services of a service designer. They are offering alternative services, though, such as customer experience analysis, analyzing, researching the voice of the customer. They're also considering the business case relative to their work. They're constantly thinking about the alignment to the strategic goals, priorities of the organization, the risk, the impact, and the feasibility of their ideas. They are defining services, they are conducting service experimentation, and they are assisting with the deployment of services. So this was published at the UK Business Analysis Managers Forum late last year, and is a start point for starting to define what are the services of a professional service designer. There is an auxiliary service, as with the business analysis service framework, of stakeholder engagement. And what I hope for you is that this helps you to see and to start to understand, well, what is it that service designers actually offer at a little bit more detail than what I've shown you so far. So what are the skills of someone that calls themselves a professional service designer? So to analyze the skill set of a professional, I'd suggest that this type of framework is really useful, the T-shaped view of a professional. So what are the personal skills of a service designer, the business skills, the business domain knowledge, etc., and then the professional skills. So let's go through each of those in turn. So if we look at personal skills, first of all, they've got to be collaborative. They've got to be a good listener. They've got to be able to work with stakeholders. They absolutely have to have creativity and outcome focus, a growth mindset, so in a belief that they they can improve on both their own skill set and the outcomes for the organization and its products and services, and lots of other interpersonal skills there besides. They require business acumen, and this is the ability to make sense of an organization relative to its context, to make informed and appropriate business decisions in the design of products and services. And then finally, they need a whole range of different professional skills, including those that you can see on the screen. They have to understand business needs, requirements, both stated and implied. They need to understand service design methods. They need to understand architecture, particularly service architecture, process improvement, and they have to understand how to engage and manage stakeholders. So how is this discipline performed? What kind of things do service designers do? Well, I'm going to suggest that service design is unique in terms of the way that we apply it is different depending on the context. So each instance of service design is unique. Service designers are using a broad toolkit as appropriate to their context. And I'm going to introduce some of the tools that they use. For systems thinking, the POPIT model that I showed you earlier, they're looking at perspective and worldview analysis. They're looking at tools that you might be familiar with, such as the business model canvas, business architecture tools like capability, modeling, VMOST, vision, mission, objective, strategy, and tactics. They've got to understand the big picture view, and they'll use a variety of tools. And these are examples of tools that they can use for systemic systems thinking. For service thinking, value proposition design, service blueprints, customer journey mapping. I showed you an example of a customer journey map relative to the car windscreen replacement earlier. For design thinking, there's lots and lots of different techniques that they can be using, but it's making sure that we've understood problems from lots and lots of different perspectives. We've challenged our assumptions, we've thought divergently, and we've converged as appropriate on appropriate solutions to problems. And then lean thinking, there's a whole raft of different tools and techniques within that space as well. There's lots and lots of other service design techniques across the A4Q Certified Service Designer qualification. We cover approximately 140 to 150 different tools and techniques. There's a massive toolkit that's applied in the delivery of those services that I've mentioned earlier. Let's show you an example application then. So for service definition, we're going to define blueprints. We're going to look at the value proposition and define a service. So there's lots of different ways that we can do this, and there's no right or wrong way. So I'm just going to show you some example patterns that a service designer might use. So they might do value stream analysis, or conceptual view of the activities that a service designer does relative to a customer. So they're going to define the value stream, the major activities, and write that down and get a blueprint for common understanding. And they might break that down into something like a SIPOC, a more detailed process-based view of that value stream. So there's a high-level view in the value stream and a more detailed view in the SIPOC. So that's an example of how they might define a service. They might not choose to use these techniques in that way. They might instead look at SIPOC in more detail and start to think about what are the controls relative to a process, who's responsible for various elements, accountable, what standards, policies and measures are applied in a process, what tool skills and knowledge are applied as a mechanism in the process. They might do slightly different variants of the tools there. They might take the process view first of all and not do the value stream. And they might say, well, let's have a look at the skill set of the people that need to perform those processes using something like the T-shape that I showed you earlier. They might instead, as a further application, not do what I've just said, but they could take something like the POPIT model and say, okay, well, for this service that I'm designing for, who are the people? Where do they sit in the organization? What policies and standards do they use? What processes? What information and technology do we need to support that service offer? And do a more in-depth analysis using the T-shape view as well, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, just as a final application, there's lots and lots of different ways that you can combine these tools and techniques, but rather than define an internal service or service definition, I've shown you here on this screen an example of how you might use these tools and techniques relative to an external service, such as car windscreen replacement. And hopefully in that service offer, they're looking to provide a high quality car windscreen replacement service. You could define the value stream for that. You could look at the current target state or the current customer journey for that. So an as is current state analysis, and you could define a target state for what you want that service to look like using a technique like the service blueprint. There are lots of other tools that you could use to define these services. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of the ways in which service designers can choose to use their different tools across their work. So some final thoughts now. In terms of how is service design performed, I've talked a little bit about the services that are offered by service designers. We need appropriately skilled service designers with a mixture of different personal, business, and professional skills, and they have to apply these 4 thinking approaches: the systemic, the service, the design, and the lean thinking. We apply those thinking approaches with a toolkit relative to our organization. We need to make our decisions as appropriate to the strategic context, and we need to keep in mind our customers each and every touch point. So I mentioned this value proposition at the start of today's presentation. I wanted to explain a little bit about what is service design, how is service design performed, the skills of a professional service designer, and give you some insight into the value of service design as well. And I hope that you feel that we've covered a little bit of information on the thinking approaches, the tools and techniques, the skills and the services that are offered by service designers. So I think today is a great example of us starting to explore this professional discipline of service design. It is a relatively new and I would suggest immature profession, but I'm hoping that today gives you some insight, and I'm hoping that from this tiny piece of presentation, this small presentation today, that there's more that can be expected of service designers, and that the prominence and importance of the role becomes increasingly recognized across the world. So thank you very much for your time and attention today, and thank you for listening. There ends my presentation. Thank you. Hi, Debbie.
Hello there. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm fascinated by this whole world of service design, and certainly, when you talk about your story with the car windscreen, I can relate it to so many incidents that happen, on a regular basis, actually. So a couple of things just from me before we go into the questions from the audience. We talk a lot about agile delivery now, agile service delivery, agile development, and what have you. Is there such a thing as agile service design, or is that a really stupid question?
No, I think it's a really good question, and Agile's gained lots and lots of prominence over the last 20, 30 years. And I think service designers have to be very aware of Agile and Agile development and approaches. Now, for me, Agile is a combination of principles, methods, and techniques. And there's an overlap in the principles that are used for Agile customer collaboration, for example, focusing on working solutions. I always think about working solutions rather than software. Agile, in terms of the manifesto and the principles, was originally developed relative to IT. And in terms of the service design view, I'd suggest service design is holistic, and IT is one of the components. So we have to be very aware of the links into Agile software development teams if they are meeting the needs and improving those touch points. But there's a slightly different scope. In terms of the methods, service designers use different methods. The double diamond is an example of a method that the service designers are using. And I think that can fit quite neatly into Agile delivery practices, because the double diamond is looking at the problem space and articulating the problems. And that might lead then to a problem definition that can then be used to define a brief where we start prototyping and testing our ideas. And that could work within an Agile context. Interestingly, the SAFe method, so Scaled Agile Framework, calls out specifically design thinking. So there is a recognition by many Agile practitioners of the overlap between design thinking and and the Agile methods. It's not perfect. There's lots of differences of opinion relative to what is Agile and what is service design. And so I think you might have just opened a can of worms there, Debbie, with that question, because even in my answer, I'm very aware there's going to be lots of people with different ideas as to how do these two professional disciplines or methods, approaches align or misalign with each other. And there's a lot of work to do, I think, Debbie, to mature service design and to make sure that it works appropriately within different contexts.
And with that kind of, I think, other approaches in mind, one of the things that I know I've been asked before was, where is the overlap with user experience and service design?
Oh, that's an interesting one. You always ask me hard questions, Debbie. I like your questions, but thank you. So, UX, in my worldview, and there are other worldviews, is typically focused on a user of an IT system. So it's not always focused on solely the IT elements, but in my experience, it's predominantly focused on what's the IT touch point. So when I think about UX, I'm thinking about websites or apps. It might be a call center where I'm typing in, I want to get to number 3 in the call center menu, for example. Now, some user experience designers think more holistically, and they'll include the people and the organization and the process elements. Some don't. But I'd say UX is predominantly focused on IT, and that customer experience is a broader view across all touch points and the end-to-end customer journey. There's a technique I showed you, the customer journey map. There's a related technique called the user journey map. And where I've seen those, and different practitioners use different formats and templates, they tend to be focused on just the IT elements. And one of the things that comes back to that Jeannie Ross quote I showed earlier, it's about the value proposition of the company. And it's no good having a great technology experience if you then have a physical product or service element or touch point and it falls over. So my online experience for my car windscreen replacement, it was fine. I booked it. It was all fine. I had the notification the day before and whatnot. It was a text message. The IT was working fine. The phone call I received to say they've not bought or purchased the actual glass to replace the windscreen. That's not in the UX world. It's not an IT element. That's a process issue. That's a someone's not done their job very well issue. And you've got to get this right. And I think there can be a rush to hope that technology is going to fix all of our problems. I use way too many, and I try to avoid them, chatbots, where you try and resolve an issue using a chatbot, and it just says, oh, sorry, I can't help you with that query. You have to call our customer service team up. And then what they often do is they don't then share the phone number for the customer service team, so you can't get your issue resolved. And it's really frustrating. So I think we need a broader view, and I know that's a really long answer to your question. Another can of worms, Debbie, with a question.
Another can of worms. Abby, I know we've got a couple of questions there. There's one I can see around BA and service design. If you could pop that up on the screen. What are the key differences between a service designer and a business analyst?
Wow. So I briefly touched on this in the presentation. There is an overlap in the services that they offer. So I'll cover that first of all. So both business analysts and service designers get involved in investigating problems and situations. So there is an overlap. They also, both roles, they get involved in feasibility assessment and business case development. Now, where they diverge, though, is the service designers much more focused on customers than traditionally business analysts have been. So often a business analyst is taking a view that's appropriate for a particular project, and they're thinking about outcomes for a project or for a product maybe that they're working on. Whereas the service designers thinking about the outcomes for the external or internal customer. So there's a slightly different perspective. They use quite a lot of the same tools and techniques. So I'd expect business analysts and service designers to be more than happy to pick up and use a customer journey map. The service designers get involved in the definition of services, where the business analysts are more focused on requirements, so different lens. And then I expect both BAs and service designers to be able to work within the agile context, but particularly with the service designers using techniques like the double diamond and prototyping, are a bit more comfortable with experimentation and adaptation in certain instances. So there is an overlap, but there's a difference, and I'd say the big difference is service designers got a much greater customer focus than traditionally business analysts have had. Some business analysts can do the role of a service designer, and some service designer can do the BA role. So they can sometimes be the same individual performing or offering services from both of the distinct professional disciplines, but it does depend on the person. So that's a really long answer to your question, Debbie. Did that help?
Well, I hope for the audience, definitely. And just thinking about the audience for this session, in fact, for the summit, we have a lot of people who are testing professionals, quality assurance professionals, quality engineers. And obviously within a lot of their teams, they're used to working with the BA role. How might that be different working with a service designer?
So service designers maybe a little bit more creative. Sometimes they might be a bit more open to divergent thinking and experimenting. So for a testing professional, you might be testing 2 or 3 different prototypes with a service designer, and you could be doing that with a BA as well. But for a testing professional, QA, quality assurance professional, it's a little bit being a bit more fleet of foot, being able to adapt and being willing to test a hypothesis. And it's got to be a team-based approach. So we've got to collaborate across these distinct professional roles for the benefit of the organization and its customers. And it might just adjust the way that we do our work, testing a prototype on a small scale rather than a full end-to-end solution, maybe. But it will vary because there's lots of variance in how business analysis is performed and how service design is performed. So there's no kind of one size fits all answer to that question, but hopefully that starts the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. You've touched on this a little bit in the presentation, I know. Abby, I can see a question about the maturity of the profession. Perhaps you can pop that up. Where is the service design profession from a maturity perspective?
Wow, that's a great question. It's relatively immature, so I'd say that it's, in my view, 20 or 30 years behind where business analysis is as a professional discipline. I would say that project management is even more mature than business analysis. So it's kind of 40 or 50 years behind the maturity of a project management professional. It's behind the maturity of testing professionals, in my view. It's a really new professional discipline. It's gaining prominence. Lots of organizations are recognizing that if customers aren't happy with their products or services, that's an issue, and they want to fix it. So there's lots of organizations that are starting to recognize the importance of the service designer role, but it's not yet there in terms of maturity. The service framework that I showed you was only published 6 or 7 months ago, and so it's not widely known, widely applied. The qualification, the A4Q qualification, is a relatively new qualification. Professional standards in this space are variable, so it's new and emerging, very exciting, and it's great to be a part of it. But yeah, it's not quite as mature as some of the other professional disciplines.
Just thinking about that a little bit, Jonathan, my expectation with the demands of the current digital consumers especially is that will accelerate perhaps more rapidly than professions have in the past, because we are demanding more service in so many ways. So when you say it's immature, is it quite a big upward curve, or quite a sharp curve upwards, would you say, for maturing?
I'd say yes. I mean, just in the last 12 months, the number of people that are reaching out, wanting to gain more information on service design, the service designers in general, I'd say, are very, very collaborative, and there's a recognition that we need to improve standards and knowledge share, and improve awareness of this really important professional discipline. And one of the things that I think is driving the demand is organizations and customers alike getting really frustrated by these poor quality products or services, and they're recognizing they've got to up their game to compete if they're commercial organizations. And one of the key drivers certainly in the UK, is a drive to save money. Because if we're looking at things like government services, the inefficiencies that are there in some government services are costing taxpayers money needlessly. And so I'm seeing a massive growth in demand for this, because I honestly can't see an argument for why you wouldn't want to do this. Why would you not want to keep your customers, your stakeholders happy, as well as align with your organizational outcomes in an efficient and effective way? And more people that are hearing about this discipline are saying, well, this is the future, this is where I want to be, and this is what I want to learn about and be part of.
I know certainly I did a LinkedIn search just out of interest before the session, and quite surprised at the number of people with service designer in their title, including some people I know. I won't mention them here, but they used to be head of service management, now head of service design, as an example.
Wow.
I hadn't anticipated. I think you mentioned qualifications there. Abby, I think we've got one last question about qualifications. How could these support me to move into or developing, I guess if you're already in a service design role, how can they support you?
So there is the A4Q Certified Service Designer qualification. It has 3 core or mandatory modules, and they introduce service design concepts, the thinking approaches, and the toolkit. There's a module that's focused specifically on design thinking, and so that's one of the most exciting areas of service design, that divergent and convergent thinking, solving problems, building prototypes, testing and iterating, and really moving forward. So in terms of the A4Q qualification, it introduces a toolkit. It gives an experience-based learning environment to build your service design knowledge and skills, and an ability to apply the tools. The other thing that I'd say is the role of qualifications is its standards. So through the A4Q qualification, there is a standard. And that's really important, particularly in a new and emerging profession, that we've got a common language, so that when we're working with each other, we know what we're talking about. If we use the word service blueprint, we're talking about the same thing. And I think that's one of the really big things in terms of this discipline. The other thing, there's a huge demand, certainly in people that I talk to in my area, for appropriately skilled and qualified service design professionals. It's a way of differentiating a service designer that might be winging it versus one that's got professional accreditation.
Perfect. I'm getting on a note here to say that we're at the top of the hour now. It's kind of time is up. So huge thank you to you, Jonathan. Service design is something that I'm very keen on myself. So I've enjoyed listening to you, and yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Take care. Just very quickly before we go, we will be having a vote for the top presentation of the summit. So we'll invite people to, cast votes very shortly. So watch out for that, and look forward to the next session. Take care.